this is made on mill. In this video, I'll be showing you how to create your own reusable fabric bunting, and I will also show you how to make it reversible.
For this project, you will need some fabric. So what I have picked here is some checked pattern, some gingham. You can do all one color or different colors. I'm going to make my birthday bunting double-sided. One side will be pink and the purple, and the other side will be red, depending on the occasion and who it's for. Optional if you want to add batting to make your bunting a little bit thicker. I will also walk you through at what step you would include this. You may also want interfacing if you want your bunting to be a little bit more rigid. And then what I did for the letters was I simply just traced out some letters on some scrap paper and then proceeded to cut out my letters with fabric as well. This was just an old bed sheet that my dog had torn up in some spots, so I gave it a wash and then have used the scraps for various projects since. In addition to your fabric, you will also need scissors, obviously, to cut everything out. You need a coordinating thread. I'm just going to use white. And then you will also need some sewing needles just to secure your work together. And then obviously your sewing machine. Another thing I will point out is that I used these templates to cut out my pieces of bunting. So you would just lie your pieces down on the fold and then to get your shape here. So if you fold this in half, that would be this in half, and then I ended up making it a bit longer. And then for these pieces here, where you have the triangle cut out at the bottom, again, you can also cut those on the fold just by flipping that around like that. Okay, so that's the general shape I have chosen. You could do squares, you could do triangles, any shape that you want works for this. Oh, you will also need bias tape because that's how we will string the bunting together, but I'll show you that when we get there. This is the fusible interfacing. If you are electing to do it, you will iron on your fusible interfacing to the reverse side of your bunting pieces. If you're making this reversible like I am, you can either do it on one side or both. That's up to you. Okay, so I have applied interfacing to the reverse side of these pieces of bunting. So you can see they are a little bit more stiff in how they lay, and they have some more weight to them. This is my reverse side. It doesn't have interfacing on, but this is really, really lightweight. I think it's a cotton. I'm not sure. I found this secondhand, so I don't know the content, but it's really lightweight, and I do think I need to apply interfacing to this side as well. So I wanted to note, if you are applying interfacing, you should do this before you add the letters on, because it'll make it easier to sew into it. It'll have some more weight. You could apply the interfacing afterwards if you want to. I just think it might be easier if you do it before. So my interfacing is on, and I've gone ahead and taken my letters and laid them down on top of the bunting pieces. So I've arranged alternating shapes and alternating colors for the bunting background. Now, something to keep in mind here is we will be making this reversible, or at least I am. So I will be sewing these pieces together face to face, and I'll probably use a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch seam allowance. So just keep in mind that you will have a seam allowance around the border. This is particularly important for this shape because you want to make sure you keep your letter out of the seam allowance. Now at the top, I'm going to be using about a 1/2 inch bias tape to secure these. So also keeping in mind that you need to stay away from your top edge as well. So I've pinned all of my letters to the bunting. And just a couple of notes here. If you want to stuff these either with some sort of polyfill, or if you wanted to beef them up a bit, you could use some of your scrap batting, and you would simply just cut out the same shape and place that underneath, and that would make the letters kind of raise out from the bunting. Alternatively, if you wanted to stuff them, you could stitch down, you know, kind of half of it, leaving some opening, and then use, I don't know, like a knitting needle to push stuffing down and then finish stitching up around. That could also give it a raised look if that's something you're interested in. I am not going to do that step in this project, but I just wanted to let you know that that was an option. Secondly, because I'm making mine reversible, you know, when I spell out happy, Happy, and I'm reading from left to right, when I reverse it, I need to put the H on the back of the Y, and then spell happy the reverse way on the reverse side. So just keep this in mind if you're using different shapes or colors. Just keep in mind that you'll need to spell the same word in reverse on the back. I'm doing 2 separate buntings for happy and then birthday. Now we have a couple of options for how we stitch these down. So I'm going to stitch as close to the edge as possible. This is a raw edge, but these shouldn't be handled very much. So I don't think it's necessary to serge the edge. I mean, if you had a serger and you wanted to do that, you could cut these out with pinking shears as well. But I'm thinking we can use a very narrow zigzag stitch and run it as close to the edge as possible, and then that should secure this down pretty well. Now you'll want to secure your letters down before you sew your 2 pieces of bunting together. When you get to a corner, you'll keep your needle down in your work, lift up your pressure foot and pivot. And you want to So this is how it's looking stitched down. I have a little bit of puckering there, so that's just something to keep in mind. And I'm going to continue sewing the rest down. Now I did want to mention, even if you aren't going to make yours completely reversible with letters on the back, if you do interfacing, even if you don't, you're still going to want to have something on the back of these to cover it up. So you will want to cut out a bunting shape the same size as this, and then add your reverse side to it, whether or not you add letters. Now for letters, where you have a open space in the middle, you will obviously need to do the outside as one stitching line and then start another stitching line to close that up. Once your letters are sewn down, we can now assemble the bunting and put the reverse side on. So as I mentioned before, because this is going to say happy birthday on both sides of the bunting, I need to place opposite letters on top of each other. So once you figure that out and your letters are stitched down, we can go ahead and put them down face to face. Now, because I cut these out with scissors and I use a template, you could be a little bit more precise. I wasn't super precise, and then when I iron these with the facing on, it did distort them a little bit, so they're not lining up perfectly, but they're lining up enough that we can still make this work. Okay, so once you're happy with your placement, you will pin down your sides. We will leave the top open. Don't sew there because we'll need to flip it inside out. Now for something with really pointy corners, those might be hard to poke out, but again, use the same seam allowance. I'm going to use about 1/4 inch seam allowance, so come to there, and then I'll pivot and go up the side here, and then I'll show you how to push those out. Now to stitch them together, we will use a straight stitch, so make sure you switch your sewing machine back from the zigzag stitch if that's what you use to put your letters down. Great, and then same thing, you'll do a back stitch to start and end. Keeping your needle down, you can pivot at corners. So there we have it all stitched together on all 3 sides. Since these didn't line up perfectly, I'm just going to take a look on this side to make sure I have enough seam allowance, and it looks like I caught enough. So that's great. So now we will definitely trim off the corners here at the end. You can also trim this seam allowance as well. In the center here, I'm just going to cut straight up towards that point. But I'm going to make sure I don't cut into the seam allowance, and I would maybe stay about 1/8 of an inch back from there. So once I have this trimmed up, we can go ahead and flip it right side out. Okay, for these corners, we want to use a knitting needle. Just be careful not to poke any holes through your seams, so just be really gentle and don't force it. So now that we have that pushed out, you are going to want to, once you finish all of them, I would wait till they're all done, I would give this a good press with your iron just to make sure these sides are sitting flat, and then you could go ahead and stitch down a border if you want. That's totally optional. I'll leave that up to you. And that's how the reverse side is looking. So I'm going to go ahead and continue sewing all my letters down, and then, you know, pairing up each side, stitching those together. And then once I have happy completed, I will show you how to add the bias tape. Now we are ready to put it all together with bias tape. So what I have done is I have measured where I will be hanging this in my dining room. I have a set spot for it. Now, you can certainly do it whatever length you want, but I had a space I wanted, so I pre-measured that. So I have this piece of bias tape that's going to fit in that spot there. You can just use a roll of bias tape like this, or you can make your own. What I suggest doing first is we're going to finish off the ends of our bias tape. We're going to fold them in just like this first, and then we will sew it along itself such as this to create a loop, and then that makes it easier so we can hang this onto either like a hook or however you're hanging it afterwards. But this just makes it easier to secure. Now, another alternative is you cut your bias tape way longer than you need. You just fold it over like this and stitch that down. And I will walk you through all this. But what you could do is leave a way longer length than you need, so that you can actually just use your bias tape to, say, tie it up to something such as this. So there's options on how you secure it to wherever you're hanging, but yeah, I just wanted to walk you through a couple of options. So what I will do first is I've laid these out here. I know the length that I have, and so I will evenly space those out and then open up my bias tape and simply insert the bunting into the bias tape such as this, and then pin it in place. So once you've pinned them all down, you can take your first and your last and line them up here and just make sure the tails are the same length, and then you know you have centered everything properly. Now just remember, we're gonna be closing in that raw edge here, so I'm just gonna pin that so I don't forget it when I'm sewing. And then I'll do the same to the other side, making sure it's the same size. Okay, now we can start stitching. So let's start here, see how our folded end or raw edge is there. So we'll start stitching just above that so we catch it, but we don't want to stitch here because we'll keep that open. I guess you could take the pin out and start stitching from the beginning and close that in there, but you don't really need to. This isn't going to open up or anything. I think it's fine just to start where your raw edge is there. So I'm just using a straight stitch. The length is up to you on how you want it to look. And then I'm stitching as close to the edge as possible, but keep in mind that the reverse side of the bias tape here, sorry if I can show you, sits a little inset from the edge here. So you want to be able to make sure you're catching both edges when you're stitching. So there we have it. All the letters are stitched on, and then we have that opening loop there. And as I mentioned before, you don't need to do the loop. You could always leave a really long tail that you can then use to tie around something. So whatever option you prefer. I might go back and just stitch the top here to secure that loop so it doesn't come open like that. But otherwise, that's how you stitch it down, and that's how it looks. And then I'll show you the reverse here as well. So yeah, here I did get a little close with the letters. So that's just something to keep in mind, but it's homemade. It doesn't need to be perfect. I've run that top stitching line just in this section here where that raw edge was and that overlap is, and now it feels a lot more secure. You could totally run this along the entire length of the bunting, but I chose not to, just save some thread. So some other options I wanted to talk about for creating your bunting. You could totally add like lace or ruffles within your seam. I think, is it called rip wrap, the squiggly elastic? I think that would look really neat stitched on top around the edge there, so you can get as decorative or minimal as you want. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. If so, please like this video or leave a comment below. Have a great day.